Two almost identical musical instruments were found in 1888 near Akhmim. Both came to France with their reeds in superlative condition. One was sent to Gaston Maspero, the other to Urbain Bouriant. Victor Loret published detailed observations, drawings, measurements and photographs within months of their arrival in Paris, respectively in 1889 and 1893. My research builds on Loret's work, guided by recent developments in the revival of ancient double pipes. The methodology is that of practical experiment, making and playing a reproduction of Bouriant's pipe. I compare its musical behaviour with that of two other 19th century finds that ended up in Egyptian collections without precise information concerning their archaeological context. A single pipe in the Turin Museo Egizio and a double pipe in the Louvre. The collective voice of these four instruments is astonishingly concordant, to a degree that either raises doubts over their dating, or indicates that the octave divisions and pitch standard of double reed players persisted for over 1,500 years, from the New Kingdom of ancient Egypt to the Christian era. I am not an academic. I was trained as a goldsmith. My business is developing and selling reconstructions of ancient musical instruments. This brings me into happy collaborations with academics, and it is those collaborations that underpin the research I present in this video. In 1889, Maspero guessed that these single pipes were buried during the 18th dynasty, or possibly earlier. We must be cautious. No accurate information about their archaeological context survives beyond the colonial story that they were found by Arabs in November or December 1888 in the excavations of the necropolis of Panopolis, Egypt. Loret first reported them in 1889. At that point, he had only seen the better preserved pipe, which an agent of the French consulate in Akhmim had sent to Maspero. Maspero hypothesizes that they could predate the 18th dynasty. The more damaged single pipe was unavailable to Loret until Bouriant brought it to France about 4 years later. To Loret's delight, its reed was in better condition. Although it was in 4 or 5 fragments, he was able to tie them together for these photographs. Loret had been confused by Maspero's reed, which he now understood to be in a shriveled and deformed state. Loret's 3 observations on Maspero's reed are reassuringly detailed. Its blades had an almost triangular opening. Around its circular base was a winding of thread covered in pitch, and 45 millimeters from its base was a strong string tightened to the point of reducing the external diameter of the tube from 13 millimeters to an oval constriction measuring 6 millimeters by 4 millimeters. I recently compared Loret's measurements of 11 other Egyptian pipes with my own measurements of the originals preserved in the Turin Museo Egizio. Loret's degree of accuracy is to my mind perfectly acceptable, both sufficient and trustworthy. As well as providing measurements of Bouriant's instrument, Loret's 1893 study offers a typology of ancient Egyptian pipes, interpreting the names of instruments in hieroglyphic script. He suggests that the language distinguished 3 kinds of musical pipe: oblique flutes called saibi, single pipes with double reeds called may, and double pipes with single reeds called assi. Drawing an ethnographic parallel, he associates the Panopolis single pipes with the Middle Eastern zamar, a type of instrument found throughout the Arab world and beyond. His suggestion that its ancient Egyptian name was Mai is consistent with the names of instruments still used in Iran. Ney Anban, Ney Jofti, and Ney Taki mean bag ney, double ney, and single ney, or bagpipe, double pipe, and single pipe. The word ney is also widely used for end-blown and transverse flutes, and in Romania for panpipes. It simply means pipe. The body of Bouriant's pipe has very slight conicity. The bore widens from 8 mm at the entrance to 9 mm at the exit. Both pipes have 2 thumb holes and the unusual feature of a fingertip hole offset to one side. These reveal unequivocally how the instrument was held. The index finger of the top hand must have covered 2 holes, the upper hole in line closed by the middle joint, the lower hole to the left side operated by the fingertip. This photo shows the only way this fingertip hole can be operated. Its azimuth, about 70 degrees anti-clockwise, proves that the instrument was held right hand high. Another unusual feature is how the reed attaches to the pipe. Without Loret's observations, we would assume that a much smaller reed was inserted into the pipe. These finds, however, connect the other way round. The pipe fits inside the reed. Loret tells us that the wood has a reddish colour. For my reproduction, I took the liberty of using pink ivory, the royal tree of Zulu culture. In recent years, we have been experimenting with various species for reeds, from the stalks of wild barley for smaller reeds to Arundo donax and, most recently, Phragmites australis for larger reeds. I decided to use Phragmites because the large veins of the vascular bundles under the epidermis match Loret's photographs. What else do these old photographs tell us? The bark appears to have been removed completely, right down to the base. Invisible in the photo, but described in the text, is the remains of a layer of resinous gum, pitch, asphalt or tar on the external surface of the lower half of the reed. The significance of this emerged when one of my reeds developed a crack in the stem. A layer of resin would probably have prevented this, and the resin adheres more effectively when the bark is removed. I suggest that the resin was an insurance policy against cracks and will be respecting this evidence from now on. The problems attending the musical interpretation of any ancient instrument are profound. Confounding factors of all kinds interfere with the reliability of results. The biggest issue is investigator bias. We tend to be aware of some anachronistic assumptions, but blind to others. As well as cultural bias, there is disciplinary bias. Another issue is that musicians are human beings whose behaviour is volatile, complex, and evolving. I make no claims to be right, but I will explain my method for regulating my personal biases and tribal prejudices. Double reeds allow the player to vary the pitch through alterations in diaphragm pressure or embouchure compression. This is a serious impediment to scientific certainty. Players unconsciously bend notes to fit preconceived ideas of tuning, and the resulting intonation depends on the player's level of expertise and the culture of their training. Any notion that the intonation of a double reed instrument is dictated by the maker is delusion. The extent of the pitch bend available with flexible reeds and a skilled embouchure means that, in practice, any scale is available. So, there are actually 2 questions to ask. 1. What scale does it produce without human intervention? And 2. How much did players adjust their intonation on the fly? I have attempted to answer the first question by using a fingering system that is mostly closed. In other words, there are more fingers on the pipe than off the pipe most of the time. This is the system used by Sardinian launedas players and by pipers from Portugal to the Persian Gulf. It has 3 advantages: a practical one, a musical one, and a methodological one. First, the practical advantage. Covering more holes stabilizes the pipe in the hands. With more points of contact, there is less wobbling. which means you don't need to grip the instrument so tightly. Secondly, the musical advantage. Keeping fingers on their holes most of the time allows a polyphonic complexity widely exploited in living piping traditions. Melody notes are punched out over a moving bass line by lifting and replacing each finger rapidly, like this. The third advantage is methodological. By making the melody notes staccatissimo, it is impossible to adjust their pitch. This significantly reduces player interference, allowing us to answer the first question with greater confidence. This is not a hypothesis for the original fingering system. It is purely a means of regulating investigator bias. I am grateful to Stefan Hagel for sharing his predictions of what the pitches of Bouriant's pipe would be without any player involvement. If both approaches, practical experiment and software modelling, support the same interpretation, then we have a stronger result. I'm happy to say that they do. Line 0 gives the complete gamut without pitch bending. Lines 1 and 2 give foundational tonal structures comprising a fifth and an octave. Bringing these adjacent harmonic frameworks into tune does not require any tinkering. They fall out of the instrument very easily. The white notes represent possible bass notes. I'm not suggesting that any of these pitch hierarchies represent an ancient musical reality. They merely demonstrate this instrument's capacity to play in multiple modes. Although the ease with which you can bend pitches poses a scientific problem, this flexibility may be something ancient pipers cultivated for artistic or ritual purposes. My inner ear initially led me towards the maqam hijaz, unaware that I was blowing harder on the top hand. When you start bending notes like this, consciously or unconsciously, any scale becomes possible. With several reconstruction projects on the go in my workshop, I was struck by a similarity between the Panopolis singlepipe and another Egyptian singlepipe, said to be of roughly the same period. Turin, Museo Egizio, catalogue number 6258/2. With the reeds I have tried so far, this produces a similar scale, sounding a fourth lower. The absence of thumb holes means that the compass is 2 notes shorter. As on the Panopolis pipe, it is easy to bend notes, unaware that your inner ear is overriding the natural intonation of the pipe. You can be persuaded, as I was, that maqam hijaz is what the maker intended. In fact, as on the Panopolis pipe, I am achieving this scale by varying the blowing pressure. It is not the scale the pipe produces if played deaf or modelled acoustically. Now, I am not deaf, and nor were its ancient players. I imagine that they were more skilled than me, able to play a wide range of scales with greater accuracy of intonation. removing the human element, rather than being more scientific, is actually going against the evidence. Ancient musical behaviour, I conclude, was fluid like the player, not fixed like the pipe. Another insight generated by practical experiment concerns a relationship with the Louvre aulos. In 2008, Stelios Psaroudakis observed that Hellenic double pipes were consistently made left-hand low. The thumb holes are never diametrically opposite the finger holes at 6 o'clock, but slightly offset, about 7 o'clock for the left hand and 5 o'clock for the right hand. This is more ergonomic. Psaroudakis calls this the rule of 5 L's. The longer pipe with longer bone sections is lower in pitch, has a thumb hole rotated to the left, and is played in the left hand. Given that Western keyboard instruments began life as rows of pipes operated mechanically, it is not unreasonable to suppose that operating longer pipes with the left hand is a continuation of the aulos tradition. Be it single pipe, double pipe, or organ, the left hand conventionally has the bass notes. A couple of weeks ago, at the 55th meeting of the aulos support group, we realised that the correlation between Bouriant's single pipe and the aulos was more significant than simply the orientation of the hands. The following videos speak for themselves. That was the top hand. Now the bottom hand. Again, watch the fingering. Bouriant's single pipe effectively combines the two pipes of the Louvre aulos into one, preserving both pitches and fingerings. In conclusion, the Panopolis single pipes were evidently capable of sophisticated music making. By excluding different pitches and by settling on different focal tones, many scales and modes are possible. The survival of their reeds and of two other pipes with similar intonation, apparently also unearthed in Egypt in the 19th century, forms a substantial body of evidence of exceptional quality. There are none of the hazards that attend the reassembly of multi-section alloy. These pipes are all in one piece, and we have precise measurements of their reeds. The lack of any detailed information on archaeological context is disappointing, but compensated for by the story these finds tell collectively. Together, they illuminate musical behaviour in Egypt over a long time span, possibly 2 millennia. Future research may refine this period, but whatever it is, the consistency in their tuning and division of tonal space is remarkable. The possession of 4 independent testimonies and the completeness of the Panopolis finds provides levels of clarity and confidence that are unsurpassed and possibly unequalled prior to the Middle Ages. Thank you for listening. I would specially like to thank Stefan Hagel for inviting me to present my research at the 11th ISGMA Symposium in Berlin, and for his faith in the quality of my work as a specialist reproducing ancient instruments. I am indebted to Federico Poole, curator at the Turin Museo Egizio, for granting me access to the pipes there, to Mirko Mungeri and Elena Bignoli for comments on earlier drafts, to Sylvain Perrault and Sibylle Emmerich for clarifying the archaeological context, and to Barnaby Brown for turning my Italian into English, collaborating on the musical interpretation, and repeatedly circling back to Loret's data with new questions and fresh eyes. I hope that you have enjoyed the result of this teamwork.